Well, I think we can get started. Good morning, good afternoon. We have people here from Brazil, from the United States, probably Costa Rica. Thank you for joining this AI development strategy webinar hosted by QAT Global. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be diving into how AI is not only changing the landscape of software development, but also becoming a core enabler of productivity, accuracy, and for sure, innovation, especially for custom software projects. Our goal today is to share with you a practical strategy, some proven approaches, real world insights on how AI is integrating into the entire software development lifecycle, from architecture, code generation, code review, project planning, and so forth. We all know that AI is somehow new in the industry, and there are a lot of concerns. And I will go through those concerns deeply regarding how to best use AI and this strategy for AI. Uh, Another key point is that this is not about replacing developers, but rather about enhancing abilities, eliminating repetitive tasks, reducing the gap between business needs and the technical implementations that we may have. And by the end of this presentation, I hope you will walk away with some clear, actionable steps on how to start using AI for real projects, for your own projects, for learning, and to show you these development strategies that we are running inside QAT. Um, and also, very important, as I said, understand the implications on data privacy, architecture, and project velocity as well. Before we move on, just a quick note about the format. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, there is a Q&A session located at the top of your screen. So I encourage you to submit your questions as they come to your mind. You don't have to wait until the end of the presentation, but at the conclusion of the presentation, I will take some time to go through those questions live, address the most relevant ones for the audience. And if we have extra time, I try to get those. I would try to get to them as many as possible. Okay. And if you have any question that requires a more in-depth answer, I will be happy to follow up with you personally. You can send me an email or you can reach out on LinkedIn, and I can go through with you on that. For those of you who are new to QAT Global, I just would like to introduce myself. My name is Ray Carneiro. I'm working as a Director of Engineering and Solutions Architecture here at QAT Global. My background spans in software development, systems integration, large-scale architecture designs, primarily in large industry where performance, scalability, and security are the paramount. At QAT, I'm in charge of integrating these emerging technologies into our clients' solutions, especially right now that we have AI and reliable AI so far, and also cloud native architectures. Over the last 2 years, my focus has been on enabling AI development workflows, guiding both internal teams, clients through this technological revolution, this technological shift. So feel free to connect. My email is here if you have any questions. And as I said, if you have any deeper questions, I will be more than happy to clarify. Before we get to talk about tooling, implementation strategies, I just want to start with a set of guiding principles for using AI responsibly, especially in environments where compliance, security, intellectual property are key concerns. Uh, well, first and foremost, always understand that the privacy policy of the AI services that you are using. If you are using Azure, AWS, Google, any big tech service for using AI, you have to understand how your data, both the input and the output of your data, is stored, shared, and potentially used for model training. Okay, not all provider will treat your data the same way. So for sensitive and regulated industry, it's critical to know whether your provider offers the ability to isolate that data, and you can also opt out of the training. Like if you don't want them to use your data, you can opt in your regulation, in your policies, and then they will comply with your data retention standards. Next, never share any identifiable or client-specific code or data with public LLMs, large language models. For example, this could include email addresses, user IDs, or sometimes we code, and in our code we use like function names or something that could be linked to a specific customer. So those guidelines will help us to make the AI coding more sophisticated and more secure. To mitigate those risks, always use mock data. Okay, you should create a realistic but fictional inputs to illustrate your use case, especially when you are debugging your code or crafting prompts for AI agents. That's going to ensure you're not unintentionally leaking production data or violating any client agreement, and that's very important. During the development using AI, it's really important also to adopt a practice of reviewing all prompts and all the response data before you share that, especially in a team environment. And one of the best approaches we have seen is trying to implement scripts or middlewares that will automatically scrub sensitive fields for any payloads that you send to the AI service, meaning that before sending that to the AI services, you scrub or you change that information in a way that if by mistake you send some sensitive data, before sending that, you can change that values, and the AI LLM specifically, they won't understand because you changed the data. And remember, AI doesn't absolve you from compliance responsibility. If you're developing AI softwares, that's your responsibility. That's your company responsibility. And you have to know that you have to have a new proactive governance for creating AI capabilities or using any AI services. Okay, so the principles are the same. If you have confidential data, you have to protect it. Never assume that the platform that you're hiring is going to do that for you. Well, protecting intellectual property and data privacy is a paramount, right? So your inputs, outputs to AI, including embeddings, training data, secrets, they are kept strictly confidential. At QAT, we ensure that these are not accessible to other customers, nor they are used for training or improving any external AI models without permission. This means that your data remains secure within your own environment. Okay. Um, let's talk about this structural difference between public and private AI deployment, which is one of the most important architectural decisions when you start creating AI and software that will implement AI strategies. On the left side, you see here we have the public AI, and that refers to service like ChatGPT, OpenAI public endpoints that you access via APIs. They are cost effective at a first glance, and it's super easy to integrate. But these are multi-tenant environment, meaning that a lot of customers are using the same environment, and even if vendors are sure that your data is not stored or used for training, you have limited visibility and control over that. So you don't know exactly what's happening under the hood. On the other hand, private AI involves deploying modules within your own cloud or on-premise infrastructure. You control the environment, the logging, the access policies, the criticality, the data flow, everything. Private deployments typically will have higher upfront costs, including, for example, infrastructure, licensing, operational overhead, etc. But that gives you a long-term control, and often you are free of regulatory or something like that. You know, you are peace of mind because you know exactly what's happening within your own infrastructure. So the decision depends on the nature of your data and your industry compliance requirements. If you are, for example, in healthcare, finance, government, the private route may be the only viable option. Okay, so because you really need to make sure that your data is safe and everything you are sending to the AI system will be safe as well. So I just put here a side-by-side breakdown to help you evaluate when to use each type of AI infrastructure. From a usage standpoint, as I mentioned, private AI gives you granular control over how your prompts and competitions are handled, and you can restrict access, enforce role-based permissions, isolate environments per client or per business usage. But in terms of use case for private AI, it's 100% tailored. You know, you have all the functionalities tailored for your specific customers, for your specific workflows. Data privacy is the strongest argument for private AI. You can layer in your own encryption, login, controls, etc. So that's the main decision. The most common and the most known services here are like ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot. Those are two great examples. So let's now shift our focus to how public AI tools handle data, specifically tools like ChatGPT, as I mentioned. ChatGPT, for example, will log all the prompts and the competitions you do, even if you have a temporary or non-authenticated session, unless you're using a private instance or you opt out of data logging. This logging is done to improve any model quality, which is great for innovation, but it's not necessarily great for your IP protection. Even if you opt out for these public AI tools or agents, as I mentioned, it takes some times, maybe months, to remove your data from there. So in a little while, maybe a month or 2 months, they were still using your data. In the other hand, when you're talking about enterprise level, we have a lot of options here. One of them is the GitHub Copilot. And they have made clear that the user code is not used for training unless you explicitly consent that you want it to be. And they have introduced enterprise versions with private cloud options for customers who need a lot of control, a tighter control over the data, etc. So the message here is read the fine print, understand what private really means in each context, and align your AI tooling choices with your data protection strategy, right? Moving forward, when it comes to combining scalability, compliance, performance, a service like Azure OpenAI Services is a compelling solution. For example, this platform gives you full control over the powerful OpenAI models like GPT-4, GPT-4.1, and the newest one. They're always improving and having new models, but that is hosted in an enterprise-grade compliant environment with Microsoft Cloud Infrastructure handling identity, networking, encryption, regional data compliances. So you don't have to worry about anything because you're paying for the services and you have a big company behind it running the infrastructure for you. In my opinion, I think what makes this OpenAI version inside Azure very attractive for custom software development is because it accelerates product delivery. We have seen exponential productivity gains. Code that used to take like days can be generated now in hours, in some maybe 1 or 2 days. So something that could be done in a sprint or less. The time to market will decrease dramatically, not just because of faster development, but because we have fewer bugs, we have tighter feedback loops, and better project scoping. Not only Azure, but beyond Azure, Azure OpenAI helps teams to shift their focus from low-level syntax to high-level problem solving. So your developers no longer needs to memorize like framework-specific standards because we are making sure that the LLMs, the models, they are learning about your standards. They are all in a private environment. So the focus will be, the developers will be often focusing more on the business logic and let AI handle those boilerplates or scaffoldings or the low level the low level software development syntax. Well, AI drives a exponential increase in productivity, and I'm saying that for a lot of time, dramatically, cutting development time. Code quality is still under development for AI. For the tests we have been doing, we have seen some mistakes or some codes could be better, but it's evolving, it's getting better every day. And I always say that you are the pilot of the project. Do not delegate everything to AI thinking that AI is going to do everything for you in the best way possible, because the models are still learning. But that's why we treat AI as for now as a co-pilot. Most of their products, they also have this naming convention, something co-pilot, etc. So the code quality is still improving, because we have fewer misunderstanding and better documentation. And as I said, this is going to shift the focus to solving core business problems rather than, spending a lot of time with technical resources, technical frameworks, understanding, reminding of technical issues, etc. Let's talk about token. Right now, we spoke about what is AI, public AI, private AI, models, etc. But my question is, do you really know when you do a ChatGPT prompt or any other tooling prompt? Do you know what happens? Do you know how AI is going to leverage what you're sending? That's all about tokens. Tokens is a foundational concept when working with large language models. Well, think a token is essentially a chunk of text, So like here in this example, this phrase, this is an example of a text and its tokens. You can see here that one token is more or less 4 shares. So a token is essentially a chunk of text. It could be a word, part of a word, or a punctuation or something like that. And in modules like GPT-4, they don't see your input as full sentences, but rather as a stream of tokens. This really matters because everything, input and output, is measured in tokens. And your usage limits and pricing are tied to these total tokens. So my meaning is, if you are writing a huge prompt, you can be sure that you're gonna pay a lot of money. So one of the things that we are doing in a software development process where we use AI is to fine tune the prompts that we send to the AI modules. Okay, so we need to make sure that whatever we are sending to the AI models, they are fine-tuned, they are precise. Because if you send anything, you are not only sending anything to AI, but you are paying for that. There is a platform, and let me show you here, where you can visualize the token usage. Let me go back to platform.openai.tokenizer. I'll pass this here in the chat for reference. And if you want to know if you have a good prompt or a bad prompt or how much that is costing financially speaking, you can start typing here. This is an example of a text. And then just by writing this small paragraph, this small text, it's using 7 tokens. And the reason I'm saying that is because you're paying for the tokens usage. So if you don't pay attention, if you're sending prompts, if you're not fine-tuning your prompts, you're gonna pay a lot of money here. So a rule for developing AI development systems is you have to pay attention for your tokens usage as well. Moving forward here, this is how it works. The tokens, they have the user message tokens. That's you, for example, writing on ChatGPT. Inside ChatGPT, they have what they call system message tokens. That's they are receiving your tokens, they're processing your tokens. So you have to sum the user message tokens, the system message tokens, and then there is the output tokens. So this is the magic or the trick behind the tokens usage. You really need to understand this, otherwise by the end of the month you're gonna have a surprise on your bill, right? Moving forward here, as I said, so how do you handle that? What is the technique for handling tokens, and how to write good AI text, and how to interact with AI? That's something called prompt engineering. And prompt engineering is one of the most impactful yet underappreciated skills in modern development. And I'm saying that because 2 years ago, when I started working with some AI development, I had no idea about what prompt engineering was. And after two years, I'm still learning how to fine tune my prompts in the best way. Every week, every month, we have new models, and they are still evolving. They're still learning. They are getting better. So prompt engineering is something that every developer must know nowadays to be a modern web developer, a modern developer, I would say. At its core, it's about framing your request to AI in a way that produce some consistent, accurate, and great results. You can think of it like an API design. If you send a prompt to a API that is ambiguous, your output will also be ambiguous, right? So when using AI to develop software, you have to avoid being ambiguous. You have to be straight to the point with your prompts, as clear as possible. Another thing that some people don't realize, that you can also include examples when writing prompts, like examples, constraints, roles. Let me give you an example. If you write act as a senior front-end developer to the AI agent to set some expectations, right? You can do something different. You can say, hey, act as a senior front-end developer, and I expect you to do A, B, C, D, and avoid doing A, B, C, D. So the more context you give to the AI by using prompts, the better. This is another strategy that some people are using, and we are using for software development, and this is called function calling. Function calling is one of the most exciting things in AI interaction. It allows you to define specific functions with AI, with parameters, type, expected response, and then you let LLM to choose when and how to call it. Giving you an example, you are interacting with ChatGPT, for example, and when you send some message, you want him to call an API or call some external service to do something. That's function calling. Think of it as giving your AI, this LLM, tools. Instead of always returning text, your AI, your LLM can decide, oh, this looks like a weather query, so I'm going to call the weather API and return some specific data. This is super critical for integrating AI into systems where you need predictability. If you need predictability, if that matters, you need to use function calling. Basically, it's super simple. You just define the schema, you handle the validation, and the model that you're using will understand all the constraints and everything that we're sending to the LLM. Well, at QAT, we are formalizing a framework for AI-driven custom software development, as I mentioned before, that balances structure with flexibility. We start by grounding every project in documentation and business context, right? And why? Because when you give AI documentation, business context, it performs best when it understands what you're building, what you're building, who is it for, and what is the expected outcome. That means that every solution starts with the product documentation, not just for wireframes or spec, but clear articulation of the business domain, all the key user journeys, high level architecture. So we start with documentation, writing everything step by step. These inputs feed into our prompting strategy, our code generation flows, our testing automation, and so forth. We also define what we call bounded context. That means mapping business logic into distinct, manageable areas that align with the domain-driven design approach, right? So if you are we are usually writing software based on requirements, and we need to understand and map where that business logic will fit into. This will allow us to structure prompts, APIs, and even full repository structures in a way that we can speed up the AI usage for code creation. And as I said before, and just finally, we treat AI as a co-pilot, right? A powerful assistant that can draft, scaffold, suggest, but always under human supervision. This model keeps us really efficient, but also accountable for what we are doing. Let's go deeper here into this documentation process that I told you, which we consider the cornerstone of AI development. AI is only as good as the context you provide. I said that before, right? If your inputs are vague, your outputs will be vague as well. That's why we invest heavily upfront in high quality documentation, especially creating what we call product requirements documentations, PRDs, and also the functional requirements documentations, FRDs. These documents will give the AI a structured understanding of the product's purpose, user roles, key functionalities, technical constraints. With that, AI can generate boilerplate code, architecture diagram, API specs, and even tests. It can be all tested all in the same way. But here's the key. The documentation is not static. It's never static. We treat it as a living artifact that evolves during the project timeline. So each sprint, we updated this documentation, we've aligned that with the current backlog, and we ensure it's available to both developers, AI agents, and business people. Because we are truly partner here with the business because they are sending requirements about their business needs. We are putting all this document together. We are getting developers and AI agents to manage this documentation and also change this documentation. It's never static. So this documentation is not an overhead, right? We make an internal joke here, we developers, I mean, that when documentation is something that in every project, nobody's like to do documentation, right? Because the project changes very often. So the more precise and structured you have this documentation, the more valuable your AI output will become. So this is what we do: strong documentation, the PRD, the functional requirements, then we link that to user stories, and then finally we create this development plan. This is just a high level. I will show you some example here, a real example of how we do that. But again, I just want to make sure that you understand the better your documentation is, the better AI will understand your project goals, constraints, and that's going to result in a better output. If your documentation is not good enough, your code won't be good enough as well, right? And then this is what we do, right? This document, just super quickly here, this document is the purpose that is to overview the project and the business objective, the components of your project, your product vision, objective, user persona, journeys, high-level requirements. This is what this PRD, this product requirement document, is for. We also track the functional requirements documentation, right? And the user stories. And finally, this is what we do. We get the implementation plan. When we have the product documentation, functional requirements, that's when we send this documentation to our AI agent, and we will create an AI agent right now. The AI agent will read both documentation and will start generating some code right now. So let me show you that. First thing we have to do, we are using here Azure, and my other monitor is here, so let me change a little bit. So what we do pretty much, the first thing we need to install here in Azure, OpenAI service, right? This is private, as I mentioned before. This is tied to my subscription. So we need to create an OpenAI services within my subscription in Azure. That's the first thing you have to do, OpenAI. And then you create the service here. It's super simple. You just give it a name, you know. You can have one by subscription, one by resource group. You can have multiples by subscription. So here is where you define your governance, right? In your at your company, if you are already using private environments, cloud environments, you have first to define the governance for where you want to create those agents, those AI capabilities. I already created one, these AI demos here, and the product that will handle that, that's called Azure AI Foundry. It's a portal for AI for Microsoft. And the first thing we have to do, let me share you here this prompt. I just have plain text here. I just have prompts, right? So our product, the sample product, will be a travel planner, right? So I love traveling. I'm sure you all do. So this travel planner will be responsible to organize, track, visualize our travel adventures with trip planning. You know, we can share that with family. We can visualize your destinations. We can see that on a map. So this is exactly we as developer, as a company, talking to the customer. We get the requirements, right? But here I'm creating an agent in AI. You see here on the left side, there is assistants or agents. The first thing I have to do, I have to deploy a module, right? This module is private. This is under my subscription, and I deployed one before. It's using GPT-4o Mini. You know, every model has some differences. Every model has some tokens usage, and you have to verify which model suits better for your project. So here, I'm just I'm just creating an agent to generate those requirements. So I'm creating GPT-4o Mini, and then I go ahead and I create an assistant. When I create an assistant, let me create a new assistant here, and I have to give him a name. This agent name will be product PRD agent, right? Product requirement documentation agent. Then I have to put my prompt there. Let me put here the instructions. And the instructions will be, you are an agent, and this is prompt engineering, as I showed you before. You are an agent responsible to build product requirements. The goal is to foster a high-level technical discussion about the best decisions for developing an MVP product. We want to develop an MVP product here. So I'm giving him an example of the documentation that I want. And this documentation is covering a summary of the project, the objective and goals, the success metrics, user personas, and anything I want. So this is my first prompt. What I can do here is generate and create this agent here, give him these instructions, right? And I can do this in many ways. This is a playground, okay? But if you want to interact with this agent, there are a lot of ways. You can use many languages like C#, you can use Python, etc. And you have here a way to interact with that agent, right? This is the code to interact. This is my prompt, so he knows exactly what to do. If I try chatting here with this agent, I can say something like, hey, hi, let's talk about my MVP product. And then he's going to start asking me some nice questions, say, hey, okay, awesome. Let me help you to create a product. First thing, let me know what is the product name, who is the owner of this documentation. So I just interact with agent. This is a trip planner. Ray is the owner of this documentation. The version is 1.0. And when was this last updated? Today. And then you see, we will interact with the agent, and then I need to give him some instructions. Like right now, he wants me to say, okay, step number 2, Ray. I know your product name is Tree Planner. You're the owner. So let's move on to the next step. What does it do? So I have to copy and paste. So I think you got the point here, right? I'm not doing all the prompts because this should take like 10 minutes. But finally, if I have everything ready here, then I come here to Visual Studio Code, and on Visual Studio Code, I have this agent mode here, right? We are using Visual Studio Copilot here, and I will start generating code by the documentation that I was talking to my agent. My agent was talking to me. I was sending prompts, receiving prompts back, and we finally created these 2 documentations, right? So I will create here a folder called docs for documentation, and I have some documentation ready here. Just a second, let me copy and paste here. I see there are some questions already on the Q&A. I'll be able to respond that as soon as possible. Travel planner. So the first file will be prd.md. The second file will be frd.md. And let me get here some files ready to copy and paste. Just a second, let me copy and paste here. All right. So all these files, I was talking to my agent, and we were discussing about the product requirement, the user personas, the core features, requirements, etc. As I told you. Then we generated these functional requirement, right? With all the functional requirements, user roles, what is the technical decision that we are expanding here, etc. How we are handling the database, what is the strategy for the database, one database per tenant. So here are all the technical details, right? So now what I can do, I can start interacting with my agent, and I can choose which agent that I want. So this is exactly the part that we need to be taking into consideration. I can and I should come here and choose my model, click on Manage Models, click on Azure, and select that model that I just created there, right? I already did it. I'm not putting here the model ID, but I did it before the presentation. So what I'm doing here is I'm telling my agent, hey, use my Azure LLM, because there is where I want my privacy, right? And after doing that, I'm gonna use the 4.0 here, and I can start talking with this agent and say, use the files and the files names and the file for the functional requirements to generate API specifications for my product. These just a heads up. These files are not for the traveling app. Okay, this is another project that I was working, and it was ready before. But you see here, so it read my file, said, "Oh, awesome! So you were thinking about creating this app, and you wrote that you're gonna do this authentication, the tenant context, all the endpoints required JWT authentication, because this is all specified here, right? We went through all this documentation step by step, area by area, and then here he's gonna generate all the API specification for me, right? And as soon as that's ready, those API specification will be created here. For now, this is just text, right? Only text. I can also come here and say, based on API specifications file, can you create a data model for me? And then he's gonna read my product requirement, he's gonna read my functional requirement, he's gonna read my API specification, and then he's gonna start modeling everything that we described in the documentation, right? So far, we don't have code so far. We are just still working with the documentation to generate the modeling. The main point here, let's generate a model first, and then after that, let's make AI do the code generation, right? So again, these are all the models that I have for my product: tenant, user, resource vision, client version. Then this is where I interact with the AI agent. I, as a developer, as a senior developer, I need to make sure that this is correct. And once that is correct, I can define what is the tech stack that I want to use. In this case, I want to use as a backend a .NET framework. For front end, I want to use some front end like Vue.js, etc. I need to specify that, right? When I specify that, I'm going to have the system architecture file as well, because I will provide this information to the model saying, hey, I want you to follow this clean architecture approach. I want a layer for API, one layer for application, one layer for domain, and one layer for infrastructure. And finally, I have the implementation plan. This is where I will generate my code, because I have the product, functional API, data modeling, tech stack, and system architecture. So my agent here, he knows everything about my product. And right now I can generate code here in Visual Studio Code using GitHub Copilot, or I can choose any other platform for doing that. Let me go ahead here. I also have a Cloud module here. As you can see here, I have Cloud Sonnet 4. And one thing that is very specific, for every interaction that I have with this module here, this Cloud Sonnet, I have to pay 1 token per request. That's super expensive. You know, 1 token per request is super expensive, especially if you don't have all the information in a good way. If your information is not good enough, you're going to spend money creating crap code, right? This is what I mean. So I have here Cloud also running outside VS Code, and I can also do the same thing. I just need, just a second, I just need to make sure that I'm the same place here. Travel planner, yeah. I need to be in the same folder here so he can read my documentation. So let's start Claudio again. I'm starting the model, and then I can start talking with my agent and say, read all the documents in the docs folder to gain knowledge about my product. Finally, read the file implementation plan. And start creating my project. So notice here that he will start using tokens, you know, to read my application, to read my folder, to read my documentation, etc. And see here, 96, 100 tokens. you're spending money here. This is what we call somehow vibe coding, right? But we are not doing vibe coding 100% of the time here because we need to verify that code, if that code has good quality or not. Okay. Sometimes AI will generate some not good enough code, I would say. And then we as developers, we need to go there and change it. Um, this is probably gonna take like a couple minutes, maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So let me go back here later, okay? But what the AI is doing, and this is fantastic, is he's going line by line and he's generating everything for me. So he's reading here, phase one, create a Dockerfile for Vue.js front end. Two, create a Dockerfile for .NET. And you see soon enough that this is gonna generate code. I need to say yes, do your work, and he starts generate some code here. Um, as I told you, this is gonna take 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So let me go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Then we come back here later. Yes, again. By doing this approach, and when you see this is gonna start generate, you see here on the left side, we started generating the source code. He's always prompting here because I didn't start the code locally with admin permission. So he will keep asking, hey, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I create a folder? Can I create the API? It usually doesn't work like that. You see here, source code. He's starting to generate my source code on the left side based on my documentation. So if I need to change something, I need to go back to the documentation and change my documentation and recreate my code, right? This is for greenfield projects where you're starting a new project. These work perfectly. And you may be asking, okay, so what if I have a software that is a project that is running for 5 years, 10 years, legacy code? We can do the same, but we have to change the strategy. You need to get the documentation per layer, let's say for the API, for the business domain. There is a little different approach here, but it works even for legacy applications, even for projects that are running for a lot of time. And as you can see, it bootstrap, it helps developers to be more productive because I can tell you for sure, we are doing here in the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes, we are doing almost 2 weeks work of sprint zero. When we start a sprint, then we have to set up the API, etc., etc. What we are doing here, we are really bootstrapping a product from the ground, and yeah, I want to do that. And it really helps us to be more productive for bootstrapping applications, right? For legacy code, there is another approach. So let's say I run here and let's do other things here. This is a legacy code, it was not generated by AI, but what can we do with AI with legacy code or for applications that are running for a long time? Well, we can use GitHub Copilot chat as well, especially for some things that we usually don't do or should do, like unit testing. You can use also throughout the application development, you can use the code generation from GitHub Copilot chat as well. So in this case, for example, I have this API here that is an order controller, but I don't have a test case here. One thing that I can do, I can highlight these post action for the order creation, and I can ask write unit test for that particular piece of code. What GitHub Copilot is doing, and you can see it's following my code pattern, the project name, the model, the layer, the inputs, the order, and I have a test here that was reading by AI in seconds, So it really helps unit testing. It really helps code quality, code smells, it helps in many ways. But as I said, for legacy code, it's a total different approach. And let's see our code here, how it's going. I already have, oh, you see here, he's creating the API layer, application layer, domain, infrastructure. And why is the agent doing it this way? Because if you remember in the documentation, I told him that I want an API layer, I want an application layer, domain layer, infrastructure layer. So he followed my plan, right? And he's generated code for me here. He's making the hard work, but there's no free lunch, as people say, right? Can you see here how many tokens we're spending? So this is the balance. We have to balance how much money we're spending here for code generation. Is the code generation worth the money we're spending? So yeah, I can tell you, yeah, we have done some tests here at QAT internal project, and we have found that the first thing, there's a time reduction using AI for scaffolding, for boilerplate validation. That has cut prototyping cycles by over 60% by doing that, because developer can focus on solving real problems, not recreating the same forms, the same APIs, the same architectures that we may have from other projects. Then there is also quality. When requirements are embedded into prompts, and we can use this task coverage that I was showing you here before, this task creation, code creation, and we can reduce some bugs, we can reduce rework, there's less ambiguity, fewer regression, clear documentation, right? And one thing that is important here is that we have faster feedback loop. AI tools will generate tests, will simulate the user behavior, and will help the teams to catch errors early, often before this code is going to staging or going to production. From a cost perspective, there is an upfront investment in tooling, training, but the return on investment is rapid. That there's less time in development, and that means lower burn rates. Fewer bugs mean lower supports, and increased delivery velocity means that the clients will go faster to the market. Let's see that again. How is the code agent going? It's creating something. So as we speak, it's generating my code here, the application layer, the DTOs, and that's where you, as a senior developer, or your company senior developers, they have to be aware and see if the generate code is good enough or not, right? But you see here, I just created the documentation, and he's creating everything for me. I think I run out of time here. Let me go back to the slides. And this code generation that's gonna take 30 minutes or more, So this brings us to the fundamental belief that we have here at QAT, that AI should empower developers. AI will act as a multiplier. You will take those repetitive, low-value tasks, like generating boilerplate code, writing test cases, creating deployment scripts. AI frees up these developers to focus on what really matters: creativity, business alignment, solving complex problems. We don't view AI as a black box, or an end-all solution, but we are working to integrate it as a collaborative partner in the dev workflow. The demo, I already showed that, right? As we wrap up here, well, I want to leave you this message. Start working with AI, balance what can be done, what is AI is generating, especially about the governance on data and IPs, etc. Right? There are a lot of strategy here that we can talk about. It's a fact how your teams will write requirements, how code is reviewed, how features are delivered, how value is measured. And we are partner here with our customers, to make sure that we bring the frameworks, training, and practices that enable AI to truly boost the team performance and not to create new risks or any bottlenecks. Well, here's my contact. Thank you for your attention throughout this presentation. Again, I'm Ray, for those who don't know me. Let me see the code generation again. If that's happening, yeah, that's happening as we speak. But I want to invite you to reach out. This is my email for any question, or if you want to discuss how we can help to accelerate, your project, how AI can leverage. We are really excited to partner with you to shape the future of the custom software development, right? Let's transform your development process together. I will open for questions now if there are any. But last thing is, don't miss out our next session coming up on August 27th at 11:30 CST. We will deliver another session. It's more infrastructure-centric topic, event-driven scaling strategy with Kubernetes. In this other webinar, we're going to explore real-world scaling patterns, how to manage state and messaging in distributed system, right? The registration will be open soon, and we're going to send out some invites. And if today's webinar, we focus more on productivity, etc., the next one will go deep on scalability and resiliency. Just to finalize and open, Taylor, I'm done here. Is there any question while AI is generating the code?
I see there's a couple questions from Lauren and Gustavo.
Yeah, I can read it. Lauren asked, do you think AI would work well for doing Java upgrades and framework upgrades of existing applications? Lauren, yes, I think. And I have an experience with .NET, not Java, but .NET, where we migrated from .NET 4 to .NET 8. Yeah, and that was a huge migration, it really helped. But as I mentioned, as you can see here, the AI agents, they will gradually do the updates, but you as the expert have to be checking all the time what's happening. Is this going forward? Is this going correctly? And that's how it is. But yeah, it really helps. I hope I answer your question. As you mentioned, from Gustavo, as you mentioned, tokens cost money, but when it comes to learning, is there a way to build an experiment for free, or do I still have to pay even just for a study purpose? Gustavo, you can subscribe, especially in Azure. There is a free tier and some free services. You have like $100, if I'm not mistaken, and you can use $100 for testing, for doing experiments, etc. So you don't have to pay. There are a lot of documents, especially for AI here, AI learning. So I'm not sure if I can send here. Yeah, I can. Let me send here on the chat. Not only AI, but you can use other services as well for learning and experiment. Only 2 questions?
Yep, that's all I see there.
All right. So again, appreciate your time, and I hope to see you soon in the next webinar. Thank you very much.